Mayflaw here, and I made this card for this week's Simon Says Stampin' Show challenge. And this gentleman, although poor guy, he got distressed quite a bit there, but I had a lot of fun with this technique and I love how it turns out, and I want to share this with you. Now, our challenge this week is to use kraft, and I decided to use kraft tags because I have a ton of them and I hardly ever use them because I have trouble getting things to look like really bright on here. And so I wanted to play around with some ideas, and I want to share with you some of the techniques that I used on that card that I just showed you. So I've got this is my favorite gentleman stamp, and I've got some chipped sapphire distress ink, and I'm just going to ink up this stamp and stamp him wherever I happen to want him onto my tag. He could be hanging off, doesn't matter. And once I've stamped him on there, I am going to work rather quickly, sprinkle him with black, regular black embossing powder, and just shake off the excess. But I'm not going to be real worried if there's a lot of excess here, okay? And what this will do, you can indeed, as I'm doing here, use distress ink instead of an embossing ink if you want to. Once he is all set, I will use my heat tool to set this embossing powder. And once that is done, of course, I will have my shiny raised embossed image. Now here's where the really fun part comes. We're going to paint with distress paints, and I have a couple reasons for using distress paints. Number one, they are blendable and react with each other and with water while they're wet, which is a lot of fun. Number two, they will hold up, and because they are the distress paints, one of the things that they will do is once they're dry, they're not reactive anymore, which means that if I paint this guy and then dry him, these paints are not going to like mix and match with other distress layers that I add on later. So, ooh, I dipped a little too far in there. I just opened up my containers and I got a couple different paintbrushes, and I'm not being very neat on this particular one because I already have another one finished, but just paint whatever parts you want. If you want to paint his face, his facial hair, whatever you want to paint, get it all painted, and you can work in batches or you can keep coming over and then squirt him with water. And you can do this repeatedly. You could also start with the image having a little bit of water on it like it does right now and then paint over, and you'll see that not as much of the paint will stick. Okay, you can see how that reacts and it blends, and we could add more water if we wanted. And if you're happy with how it looks, you can leave it like that, let it dry. Personally, I like to take a paper towel and just blot off some of the excess, and then take a look, see what it's looking like, see how I like it, and see where I want maybe some contrast, maybe some highlights, add a little white paint here or there, or a little darker blue paint here. And you can just keep repeating, squirt a little bit of water to blend the colors and get that going, blot it off, and you could just keep going until you're happy with how it looks. Now you're going to want to be gentle to not put a ton of water, just maybe a squirt or two as you go along, just so that you don't disintegrate your tag. You can see my tag starting to get all the way wet. If that happens, the other thing that you can do, as long as you like the layers that you have, you can dry it all the way off and then continue with more coloring, more layers. So here is a gentleman that I have colored that I am happy with. For me, this was the really important part of the project. You see how all the colors are vibrant against that kraft background. It's very clear that the beautiful oranges and blue colors that I have here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm taking some Gathered Twigs Distress Ink, and I'm just going to add some around the edge. I'm not focusing too much on the edge. I'm just trying to get some color, some added darkness near the edges of the tag. Okay, and we're not, like I said, I'm not especially worried on the very edge because we're going to do something else for that in a moment. But once I have him here and I've got a little bit of brown out on here, I'm going to crumple him all up. So you're going to have him all crumpled up and then open him back up. Now, depending on the paper and the wetness and all of that, sometimes some of that embossing powder will flake off. So you might have areas that are no longer shiny and black, that look kind of crusty and old. That's totally fine. On my original example here, and I'll bring it way up close so you can really get a good look, you can see on his vest, this is blue. That's the chipped sapphire color that I originally stamped in it. On his vest, all of that shiny black wore off, whereas up here it didn't. And that's kind of part of the charm, at least for me. I like how that looks, how he looks really aged and distressed. So I'll share with you, now that you can see, I mean, the really fun part, of course, is being able to color so easily these images, and there's so many things you could do onto Kraft now and get vibrant colors with your distress paint. The other things that I did, the background here, it's just stamped, and I'll show you in a second how to do the big brown splotches. On the tag itself, I do love to take a stamp. Here's a Tim Holtz Gears stamp and some gold paint. I don't even have a gold stamp pad. I just usually use gold paint. And I love to use especially the Gears and stamp onto my tag. And what that'll do, you can see it more clearly here because I've added some purple, is that it will add just another cool layer of accent that you can layer over and add just that great detail. And these blueprint stamps, especially this gear one, is just a really good thing. You could use it all whole for something, but I just love using little pieces of it because all those little teeth of the gears and stuff, it just makes such an excellent edge finishing accent. So let's talk about, everything else is pretty self-explanatory on this, so let me just talk about the brown and how I got the brown on here. I've been trying to use my reinkers more. I have a couple of them. This one is walnut stain, and basically I squeezed it so that it was all emptied out, but there's still a little on the edge, and then I just ran it along the edges here, and it doesn't look like much when you first do it, but if you get these wet, as I will right here, if you get the tag wet again, and this poor tag, you can see we're just going to keep abusing it, it will darken, but it'll also spread. Okay, so it was on the very edge, but now because it's wet, it's wicking the brown color out and onto the tag. And what you see here, here, you can take this and just put a drop here or there. And you can drop it, you could flick it, I suppose. You don't have as much control, but you could kind of try to get it to flick there. And if it is already wet, you can see it's going to spread out really quickly. If it's not already wet, you can go ahead and wet that area of the tag, and it'll help that walnut stain spread and really just give you a great aged look. Now you could skip the embossed part. I tend to like to do the embossing because I feel like it helps the image pop better. But for example, here is a globe that I stamped with black archival ink that I could now go through and take my distress paint once again and color and do this globe up. The thing that I find is because I'm using the paint, and I'll show you here, you'll still see it, and this was stamped rather quickly and lightly here as well, but you can still do the paint. But when you add the water to this, and when you pull off that excess moisture, you'll still see the lines. Okay, you can still see where I stamped, you can still see the lines and stuff, but I feel like you have to take off a bit more of the paint to really see it. I feel like if you don't have that raised embossed image, it just doesn't quite show up as nicely. Okay, so here you can see I just redid the globe just to show you the difference. And I think Mauve Lawn would be a better green for this particular color combo, but I don't see it here on my desk right now. So anyhow, this time I embossed the globe versus just stamping it with an archival ink, and I think you're gonna really see the difference here. I'm gonna add just a different blue in here, just just for a little contrast. And you do want to be careful. I kind of wiped off the lighter color there, but you do want to be careful, obviously, when you're dipping in, if you're doing this where you're dipping into your distress paints. I like to pull out a different brush for each one that I'm working with so that I don't accidentally put the wrong color in the wrong one. The other thing you could do, if you didn't want to have to take the tops off, you could just squeeze out a bit onto your craft mat and pick up the paint from there. That would work as well. But anyhow, I'm getting my globe all nice and watered up, and I'm just going to press off a bit of the excess. And you can see already what a difference it makes to have how much more vivid this is, because I don't have to rub off as much to get that blue to really show up. And it just gives it a better pop, a better contrast with the embossing. But of course, totally optional. I hope you've enjoyed my creative play today. I'll finish up this tag and stick it on my blog. You can get the supply list for my card and also join in the challenge over at the Simon Says Stampin' Show challenge blog as well. I wish you very happy distress paint crafting.